In a way, the climax of Hunting Adeline is defying gravity from Wicked. Every time I wear this sweatshirt in one of my videos, there's always someone who's like, oh my god, you go to UC Davis. But I've also gotten at least 2 comments already where someone went on an orientation tour at that school, and apparently the tour guide would mention that one of the alumni was me. So if that tour guide is watching this video, I just want to ask, why would you subject people to that? You know, like, why would you subject innocent freshmen to go ahead and check my channel and open a video like this? If you have been here before, you know how the drill is. When it comes to these types of book roast videos, they are essentially recaps of a book that I find to be absolutely wild. In fact, so wild that I have to make like an hour-long video about it where I will literally read out loud quotes from the book, because some of the stuff that gets written is so bananas cuckoo that I know if I don't include a screenshot, you will not believe that it was actually written in that book. For this video, I'm gonna be recapping Hunting Adeline. We're just gonna be joking and laughing about it. This is for entertainment purposes only. Let me introduce to you the book. This is essentially a sequel to the very popular Haunting Adeline that is a very well-known dark romance book that blew up on TikTok. I made some videos about the first book, which I'll link in my description, but I'll also recap a little bit and catch you up to speed. This duology is basically about this indie writer who becomes the target of obsession for this hacker vigilante man who literally falls for her just from seeing her at a bookstore signing. Ever since then, he becomes so obsessed with her that he stalks her, he will wait outside her house, he will send threats to other men that she's hooking up with. This also results to the deaths of some of those other men as well. But it's okay for him to do all those things because the book really emphasizes how much of a good guy he is. Because when he's not busy stalking Adeline and breaking into her house and forcing himself on top of her, he is dedicating the rest of his time to philanthropy, specifically targeting traffickers who are snatching up your women, your children, the innocent, voiceless people in your Walmart parking lot that get kidnapped, because apparently that is how trafficking works. There is no discussion about how oftentimes traffickers are the victim's own family members, and victims who become a part of this are often people in marginalized groups who are homeless and in poverty and don't have any solid support system, and therefore make them the most vulnerable to these traffickers because they are the types of people that are not really known about publicly. They're invisible to the world. But that is not at all discussed in the book. It is just little Miss Susie snatched up at your local Walmart. The bad guys aren't just traffickers. They also turn out to be part of a secret society that plans on taking these children and these women and making them part of their blood sacrifices. In my first video about Haunting Adeline, I talk a lot about how the way that trafficking is depicted is so cartoonish. Believe it or not, the sequel, Hunting Adeline, is even more goofy than I could ever imagine. It might be the most ridiculous book that I have ever read. When I was putting together my notes for talking about this book and I truly saw all the events laid out for me, I was actually stunned at the way that things progressed over the story. You'll see why by the end of this video if you stick around, but here's a hint for you. Roses. They will play a much bigger part in this story for you than you will expect. In fact, I want you right now to imagine what could possibly be happening with the delicate flower of roses in this book. Come up with a theory on your own on what could possibly be happening with roses, and then stick around with me for this video and see if you were correct by the end of it. We do know in the first book that roses are an important flower to Zayd. Literally, when he is stalking Addie and snatches up one of the men that is hooking up with Addie, the last thing that the man sees before he gets knocked out and tortured by Zayd is this guy who has one black eye and one blue eye, like a husky, showing up in the dark with a rose between his teeth, smiling maniacally. If that's not a haunting image for you, I don't know what is. But because the symbolism of the rose continues throughout the sequel, I feel like it would be fitting to give an homage to the rose itself. That's why I want to thank today's sponsor, Lovehoney. You see, Lovehoney has created a toy that is also an homage to the rose. I'm gonna try to avoid being restricted on YouTube, so all I'm gonna say is that it's a toy, because it really is. Don't think too deeply about it, okay? okay? And the cool thing about toys is that they can be very stimulating and fun, and sometimes they suck too. But guess what? This rose does both. It's completely waterproof for aquatic adventures. There's only 2 buttons, so it's very easy to use, and there's 10 different modes, so you can find out which one your favorite is. They have a magnetic charger, which is great because I hate operating with batteries, and it's just a pretty solid toy to have. But for real though, I have seen this around the internet and I have been curious about it. So I'm really glad that Lovehoney reached out to me. Valentine's Day is coming up, so I feel like this is the perfect time to treat your partner or treat yourself. But there's tons of other products that Lovehoney has on their site. All of my followers will receive an additional 10% site-wide discount when they use my exclusive code CindyLove10. It is just a toy, okay? Don't come for me unless you do use this, then you might. All this talk about roses is definitely putting me in the mood to talk about Hunting Adeline, so let's get right into it. We are full spoilers ahead, starting right now. So the ending of the first book ended pretty much on a cliffhanger where Addie herself gets snatched up by the bad guys, and Zayd also gets ambushed by other bad guys. I clearly was so invested about what would happen to them that I took several months before starting the sequel. Definitely no other reason. So Hunting Adeline starts off with Addie waking up in a very strange place, strange voices around her. She's all groggy, she's trying to gather herself, and then she realizes her situation very quickly, given the context clues of the conversation that she overhears and the Hispanic accents that get called out, so that make her realize that she is being trafficked. You actually think we'll be able to hide her from him? It's fucking Z, man. Another man responds, this one with a slight Hispanic accent. If you recall from my first video about the first book, the traffickers being Hispanic was referenced a bit, but that happened like midway through the book. So the fact that we're getting again in the very first chapter of the very first page of this book kind of gags me a little. I was like, damn, okay. I thought we would warm up to the microaggressions, but we're just gonna dive right in. Speaking of which, we also talked about the anti-Semitism that pops up halfway through of the first book, and it was also revealed to me by comments that apparently the initial versions of Hunting Adeline was much more anti-Semitic, with very obvious depictions of Jewish people and blood libel, which, you know, was there in the first book. I am happy to report that in the second book, the author has dialed down on that. Like, we don't have anti-Semitism anymore, which is great, but the Mexican slander did not end. It is constantly referenced that these people have Hispanic accents because they will occasionally slip some Spanish in. One of them is cussing out his colleague and says, you can't do whatever you want, stupido, because you have a big fucking target on your head in the shape of a Z. Another time, he barks at his colleague saying, shut up, stupido. Another quote has him saying, Max hired Rick to bring you in, and since the guy is a complete idioto, he asked me to help. Another quote that he says to Addie, plenty of room now since it's just you and the local one. I just really appreciate the attention to detail with making sure that these words are italicized and have accent marks so that you could really hear the accent. If anything, this book might be bilingual. Can you imagine if Addie survives the situation and comes out of it speaking fluent Spanish? Like Duolingo who? Anyway, back to Addie grappling with the horrors of this situation of being surrounded by men of color. She thinks to herself, I don't know why I got tossed into this shit, but they need to take me out of this fucked up salad of depravity. I don't belong here. I belong in a salad full of fruits and vegetables, healthy things that don't run me off the road and enslave me. Girl, what the fuck are you talking about? What kind of metaphor is this? Are you a bowl from Sweet Green? She's really looking around and thinking, this salad is a bit too ethnic for me. I need to go back to Whole Foods where I really belong. We get more context clues from their conversations that clearly they had an agenda with snatching up Ad, and it is to antagonize Z, who is an obvious reference to Zayd. One of them says, this girl right here is worth millions. I mean, we got a fucking diamond here. Just imagine it, dude. Z's girl, the one and only, up on an auction stage. You know how many enemies he has? People will be frothing at the mouth to make his girl their little toy. I'll get my cut from Max, and the society will compensate you, I'm sure. We'll be living fucking lavishly. He lets out a burst of hyena-like laughter. I can buy my own goddamn private island after the money goes through. First of all, let's not oversell Miss Adeline, okay? She is a millennial woman who just compared being trafficked to being in a salad. I don't think she is a rare diamond that they're gonna make bank on. Like, can you imagine being that important? But second of all, the bad guys laugh like hyenas too? This is really just not boding well for the Hispanic community. So obviously Addie is internally freaking out and she's like, oh my God, I need to escape and get out of here. How do I calm myself? How do I center myself in this situation? Deep breaths, Addie. What did Zayd teach you? It takes several moments to collect my thoughts, but eventually his voice filters in. Leave evidence. And thanks to those 2 wise words that he once spoke to Addie, she's able to tug at her hair to leave strands behind. That way she has some DNA in case people are able to find her. The thing is, I feel like that would have been a common conclusion that you could have come up with yourself without trying to channel Zayd as if he taught you something new. Like a suburban mom on TikTok has made probably hundreds of videos about this. I just felt like this was an easy instance where, you know, Addie could have used critical thinking. So while Addie's in this predicament, Zayd is also in his own. Like I said, Zayd has been ambushed by the other guys in the cliffhanger from the first book. He also, at the time, was with one of his workers whose name is Jay. So it's the 2 of them who are in big trouble. So he's trying to keep morale high with reassuring Jay that they're gonna get the fuck out of here. For context, before I read this quote, Claire is one of the bad guys because we do get female villains in this book, which I do think is kind of interesting. There was an attempt to expand that a little bit more because it is true that women are involved in horrible, heinous crimes against humanity and are part of trafficking other women. So I do think Claire could have been a very interesting character, but you'll see towards the end how that logic kind of just jumps out the window. But anyway, while they are tied up together, he whispers to Jay, just think of Claire as your fairy godmother, and this is the pumpkin carriage that's going to whisk you away off to your princess. Because Jay is bisexual so that we can have LGBT representation, he says, or Prince, I wouldn't mind either. Zayd replies, as long as you still make me Uncle Z. Jay says, you seriously think I'm going to have kids after seeing this shit every day? Zayd shrugs and says, why not? Uncle Z will keep them safe. I can be their personal bodyguard. They may not like it, but I'll fucking do it. He shakes his head, the tiniest of smiles tipping up his lips, understanding precisely what I'm doing. I'm giving him a future, painting a picture of him surviving and finding happiness, whether he decides to breed mini gremlins or not. Weird way of comforting your colleague while they're in a life or death situation, but okay. Me personally, I wouldn't want any future with Uncle Z. Like, if I am close to death, please don't make things worse by calling yourself uncle to my imaginary children after I've literally seen a bunch of kids die, given the nature of the business that they are working in. Something that Zayd also does while they've been kidnapped by the bad guys is continuously taunt Patrick, who's one of the bad guys, into being gay. You don't want to get in a sword fight with me, Patrick. I promise I'll win. I deadpan, glancing down between his legs. Patrick allows us to pass before he falls into step behind us. Try not to stare at my ass, I drawl. You can interpret this one of 2 ways. Either he's trying to mock them by insinuating that they're gay, which has many implications of how he views being gay, or Zayd is actually bisexual, which is also a detriment to the bi community. We already had to fight the stereotype of being an annoying bi person every day, and he's really not doing us any favors here. Fortunately, Zayd realizes that they have Bluetooth speakers in their ears. Fortunately, because those speakers are so small in their ears, the bad guys didn't even think to check their ears. So he realizes that he can use a Bluetooth speaker to alert the rest of his team that they are in danger. This speaker is voice activated by saying call, so they then decide to awkwardly bring it up in their conversation. I train my gaze on Patrick. So, am I going to get my one call when we get there? He also says to Jay, didn't you promise your brother that you'd take him to Chuck E. Cheese tonight? Jay realizes what's going on and he's like, yeah, I should probably call Baron and tell him I can't make it. It's probably important he knows that we're being held hostage, right? I'm reading this shit and I'm like, these are truly the worst bad guys in the world. I'm not even talking about this forced conversation. I'm literally just wondering if you were these terrible people who, you know, wanted to take down your enemies, which is a group of vigilante hackers, why would you not do your due diligence of at least inspecting the people that you just kidnapped to see if they have any recording devices on them or any weapons? That's really on them at this point. Like, they deserve to be outsmarted by this Scooby-Doo ass conversation. And it really does work because Zayd's men are able to track him down and help them escape from the society. So now Zayd is back in their headquarters. He finds this poster that an anonymous person posted on a dark web forum where they promise a reward of $12 million if Addie gets snatched up. Again, can you imagine this girl being worth $12 million? She is more expensive than several people's student loans combined. So Zayd finds out that Max was the one who ordered a hit on Addie. For context, Max is one of the characters in the first book. I think he was like an evil politician or whatever, but it doesn't matter because he's about to die soon because Zayd kidnaps him, tortures him, tries to find out why Max would do this. He finds out basically Max and Zayd had made a deal where Zayd would not kill Max's father. As long as Max Max doesn't touch Addie. That was the agreement. But then somebody killed Max's dad and wrote a note saying that it was for Addie. And so he assumed that it was Zayd, and therefore he just put a hit on Addie out of retaliation. Zayd gets really pissed off, and he has to explain that obviously the society did this because they knew that he would think that it was Zayd and do all the dirty work for them. It doesn't really make sense considering if they really wanted to screw Zayd over, this evil society could have easily done that themselves. Like, I don't know why we needed a middleman to do that considering all the resources this secret evil society has, but okay. So in retaliation, Zayd castrates Max. He sucks in a deep breath, preparing to let loose another scream no one else will ever hear, but then he passes out. Pussy. Quite literally now. See, this is what conservatives think gender-affirming surgery is like. This is what Trump's new laws are trying to prevent. Later on, Zayd is getting some intel about some organ traffickers who Jay says that they could be potential allies for Zayd. They call themselves the Basilic Brotherhood, widely known in the black market for trading in human organs. Riker, Dare, Case, and Slade. No one knows their real last names. At this point, Zayd has to close his eyes and steel himself from losing his temper. This could be one of two reasons. Either he's angry at how these men could participate in such horrible, inhumane, and cruel activities like trafficking organs, or like me, he's just pissed off that these names are fucking stupid for organ traffickers. Either way, Jay tries to calm him down and says, before you get growly and go on a killing spree, Tony the Tiger, there's been some talk that they are not actually as bad as they're making themselves out to be. I shoot Jay a look, but he ignores me. I'm scarier than Tony the Tiger, and he knows it. You'll get along with them great, Jay says. You all are in a business where being obscure is key, yet each one of you stands out like lollipops among moldy bread. Very lickable lollipops too. Yeah, whatever. I didn't ask to be beautiful. What the fuck is even this conversation? Speaking of nonsensical shit, let's go back to Addie's perspective and see how her circumstances of being trafficked are being depicted in this story. So the traffickers take her to this place that's in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods, and there's a random house in the middle of the forest. Rio walks ahead of us, shooting an indecipherable look over his shoulder before he leads me into the house straight out of Courage the Cowardly Dog, only double the size. But I imagine the shit that happens in this house is full of horrors much worse than that purple dog ever experienced. I just really appreciate how this book, instead of putting in the effort to provide any description of the environment or like the materials or architecture of the house, we just went ahead and called it the Courage the Cowardly Dog house. Because you know, when I think about where traffickers put a bunch of women, my first thought is where that purple dog lived. So in that house, Addie meets her new madame, who's basically this woman that bosses the other girls around and tries to make sure that they are ready to be bought by these men. And she gets put a tracker inside her. She's forced to stay at essentially a whorehouse, but she gets a room to herself, which you could argue is more personal space than most people living with a roommate in New York. She also gets a tattoo that is a barcode on the wrist, which is kind of weird because if this were a big bad secret society of traffickers, wouldn't you want the tattoo to be more hidden instead of a barcode obviously out in the open like you're at a fucking self-checkout line at the grocery store? Because I thought the whole point of trafficking women is to make sure that this shit is discreet so that they are like invisible to the world. But we cannot even worry about a detail like that because there is this weird initiation that all of the women are forced to do later on that's called the culling. It's literally a hunting game that they play where the girls are running around in the woods and the bad guys use arrows to shoot them, and the goal for the girls is to not get hit by the arrow. If you don't get hit, you will be seen as more worthy, and then you can be selected for auction where a bunch of men can bid on you in a more formal setting. But this is kind of like the pre-game situation, and leading up to the culling, there are these days where the girls can do practice runs with plastic arrows so that they can train for the real deal later on. Separately, it's also mentioned that the madame is putting them through etiquette classes for how to address their masters and how to speak to them and how to eat so that later in the auctions, they can be all prim and proper and essentially subordinate to the men. What I'm wondering is this human trafficking or is this a bad young adult dystopian series? Because why are we acting like a dollar store Katniss Everdeen running around in the woods and getting dolled up by like an oppressive regime? It's literally called The Culling, like it's a new YA trilogy coming out, and the way that they talk about the whole setup is giving 2010s dystopia. Though I must admit, The Culling always seemed counterproductive to me, he continues, even if it is fun. Clearing my throat softly, I ask, May I ask why? It teaches you how to run away from us. It's been a tradition for centuries, but if you ask me, I'd prefer my women to be incapable of getting away. I nod my head slowly. That makes sense, I admit. And really, it does. The culling is designed to test our endurance. I get that. If we're too weak and broken, we'll be lifeless little things, resulting in them constantly having to replace us. It's designed to break us mentally, spiritually, induce terror and hope of escape just to be dragged back again. Nonetheless, Xavier is right too. It does teach us how to run. Another quote. Let's go. Time to eat, and then we will go over lessons on how to act properly tonight. When night falls, the culling will begin, and if you pass, you will be required to mingle with our guests afterward. Another quote where the madame is talking at the auction later on. These girls were deemed unworthy in the culling. For centuries, we've carried on this tradition. In our world, only the strongest can survive. Only those who can endure and persevere no matter what we throw their way. These girls standing before you, they are worthy of you, and they will prove their worth to you by snuffing out those that were not good enough. Another quote later on in the book. This is how one of the chapters begins. Bright sunlight pierces through the dusty curtains, and it almost feels mocking. I squint my eyes, the migraine worsening as I train my tired eyes on the dirty window. The phantom in the sky really is a devil. Why else would she make such a gruesome day so bright and sunny? Today is the culling, and already the house seems to be filling up with chatter. Is that last quote basically not Katniss Everdeen waking up to reaping day? This series is so wild because at first we were talking about women being trafficked, but then there were a bunch of virgin sacrifices and blood libel, and then the author got called out for anti-Semitism, and now we're at the sequel and we're pivoting to like Walmart Hunger Games where women are playing duck hunt. Like, what is going on? So let's get into the day of the culling. On this day at the house, a bunch of men who are the clients for the auction show up to choose their targets. The madame leads the women out the door and into the woods, and it's nighttime and there's a massive bonfire behind the house with a bunch of people crowded around it, bundled in like warm clothing and drinks in hand. There's also several large TVs placed sporadically around because the hunters will wear body cams to provide entertainment and viewing pleasure for the other guests. It's basically like fucking watching football or some shit. Like, it's game day over here. Behind us, the men ready their crossbows, the clanging of metal as they load arrows into them grinding against my frayed nerves. Risking a glance behind me, my eyes round when I see headgear settled over their eyes. Night vision goggles. Fuckers. Everything about this stupid fucking game is rigged. Alright ladies, Francesca starts. Let's go over the rules briefly. You will be given a 10-minute head start. You are required to stay within the maze walls. If caught going outside of them, it will result in immediate death. They will shoot to kill, not shoot to maim. At the end of the maze, there is an open area. If you reach this location, you are immediately deemed safe and no harm will come to you. If you are still within the maze but have not been shot and the allotted hour depletes, you are also deemed safe and no harm will come to you. Is that understood? How's it said from the Hunger Games? May the odds be ever in your favor? A male cuts in. Just because you make one of the characters make a joke about how this is like the Hunger Games doesn't excuse the fact that trafficking is being depicted like it's the Hunger Games. Also, if these girls are being shot to kill and they can be killed if they go outside the maze walls, why are they being trafficked in the first place? Because I thought the whole point was to sell these women to men for sex. Like, yeah, there was that flimsy explanation that they're trying to cull down the women to the best physically able ones who would be worthy enough for the men, but I feel like traffickers who already have their victims would not be so selective and picky to the point where they have to make up this dumbass game. Like, they would just sell whatever women they have regardless of whether she's fit or her body is tea or not. Anyway, so the game starts literally when a guy shouts to run. The girls take off, sprinting through the woods while dodging traps, which are basically strings tightened between two objects at foot level, so if someone trips, they'll be strung up like a sack of potatoes. There are also walls of branches that are piled high on either side of them, which are basically makeshift barriers to confine them in the maze. You would think that there would be more of like a solid structure, like concrete or something, so that the women wouldn't just like cut through the foliage and try to escape, but you know, whatever. Anyway, so Addie is running around trying to stay safe. There's also a girl named Phoebe who clings onto her and begs her for help. Addie takes her in with this new ally. It's obviously set up for her to have like a friend who dies tragically later, like a certain other character in the Hunger Games who became an ally to Katniss in the first book. There's a point where they're hiding though, and then one of the men is drawing closer. Was that you, Firecracker? He says in a hushed tone, as if he's whispering right into our ears. Oh yeah, this guy calls her Firecracker to taunt her for some reason. I'm not sure why. Maybe Firecracker is a slur for feisty white people? Shit, Addie, think. What would Zay do? He'd be a fucking hero. That's what he'd do. Zayd isn't interested in saving himself, only everyone else. So what would he want me to do? Save myself. He'd want me to save myself. Girl, you could have just come to that conclusion on your own. How about you just save your own life without thinking about a man for motivation to do that? You did not need to think about what he would do in order to realize that you should be saving yourself in a life or death situation. Like, this isn't even critical thinking, this is just basic survival instincts. Anyway, so they keep running around the woods. Unfortunately, Phoebe does get shot by an arrow, and she tells Addie that she can't keep running, and Addie's like, no, Phoebe, you can do it. And Phoebe's like, no, Addie, go. Addie is now in a dilemma of what to do, but fortunately, instead of using any thinking, she can just think about Zayd, whose voice says in her head, run, little mouse, they're coming for you. Wow. I am so glad that Zayd was able to point that out for her. She would have had no idea that they were coming for her, even though there are literally men shooting arrows at them. So the men are about to catch them, but Phoebe does a brave, heroic act. When Phoebe gets shot by another arrow, she was able to get hold of this other guy's arrow and shoot that at the other guy. So that was how she was able to take someone out, even though she essentially lost the culling game. Once more, she meets my wide stare. So many words rise to the tip of my tongue. None of them is sufficient. Goosebumps rise on my skin, and all I want to do is tell her how proud I am, how fucking admirable and brave she is. We both know she's not going to make it through the night, but this was her choice. Yay, girl power. Yeah, it was her choice. Yeah, this is what Susan B. Anthony fought for. This heroic act sparks newfound determination in Addie as she runs as hard as she can, and she thinks to herself, these men may be skilled in hunting, but what they don't know is that I've been hunted by a far scarier man. I was a mouse caught in a trap before, scared and helpless as I was taken between the teeth of an apex predator. But I'm not their little mouse, and they are not Zayd, and I will never succumb to them. Pause. You're telling me that you're inspired to survive because you know you have been through so much worse by someone else, but that someone else is also supposed to be your love interest that we're supposed to root for you to end up with? So is Zayd actually a good person for you or not? Because there's a lot of contradictory logic here. But hey, it fucking works because she survives a culling with some of the other girls, which means that in the next chapter, she has to get all dolled up and pretty to be part of the auction. One of the girls who survives is named Sydney, who throughout the book has been butting heads with Addie. They have a very tempestuous relationship. But while they're getting ready, Sydney does bring up another character in their conversation named Rio. This guy is one of the traffickers. He does have occasional interactions with Addie, and the fact that he even has a name in the first place implies that maybe he'll have more of a role besides, you know, random Hispanic trafficker number 5. So Sydney says, you have a man at home, right? Z is his name? Addie says, why do you care? Sydney says, a sexy Puerto Rican man has the hots for you and you don't care. To which Addie thinks, Rio does not have the hots for me. Oh my god, Sydney, stop! The hot Puerto Rican man that trafficked me does not have a crush on me. There's no way he'll ask me to prom. He called me an idiota. Now, aside from the fact that we just went from a Hunger Games simulation to this slumber party chit chat, Sydney may have a point though, because there does seem to be some companionship forming between the two of them. For example, they will have moments like this. Afterward, Rio carried me up to my bed, my legs physically unable to support me from the abuse my body endured. He couldn't look at me, not when he did nothing while men stole from me, and then he picked up that broken girl and carried her to bed, only because Francesca demanded it of him. But he did speak to me. He told me about the chupacabra, a mythical being rumored to terrorize Puerto Rico. He told me when he was young, he was playing with his baby sister when he swears that he saw it, a grotesque gray creature with wings, and it flew by before he could blink. I don't know why he told me that story, maybe to distract me, but I suppose it worked. He gave me a monster that didn't feel real instead of focusing on the monsters that are. You know, there's a little bit of a bond happening. Sometimes he's a trafficker, sometimes he's a Latino author writing a magical realism story for Addie to go, you know, nighttime. There's another part where one of the bad guys who wants to buy Adeline is being very gross to her, and Rio interrupts them by saying he's required to change the bandages on her back before the auction. So that's like an excuse for him to pull her away. Basically, he was helping her in his own along the way. And he does actually change her bandages as if they're reenacting a scene in Six of Crows. This is also a moment where we find some background story because Addie asked him why is he involved in all of this, because if he were actually a bad guy with no remorse, then he wouldn't have helped her out. He says, "You're not the only one who's enslaved to powerful people." She replies, "Zayd is going to kill you and you know this, so if you know you're going to die anyway, then why continue?" He slaps a strip of tape on me a bit harshly. "Puñeta, how about you use that pretty little head of yours and figure it out?" He snaps, his accent deepening with anger. If someone doesn't stay for their own life, what else could make them stay? My face drops as realization dawns. "They're using someone against you," I breathe. "Family?" "My little sister," he grumbles. "As long as I'm a good boy, she won't be sold." Why not just take off with her and run? Because I can't take her. They have her and I can't get to her. Comprende? This kind of gags her a little bit because she's like, "Ooh, I didn't know that was happening."
Yeah. I didn't know that was happening.
"Thank you," I say quickly, the words burning my tongue on the way out. He glances at me. "Don't thank me yet, Princesa." Later on, Addie and the other survivors have to throw rocks at the girls who didn't pass the Hunger Games test. And you know who that includes? Phoebe. Thoughts and prayers to this girl indeed, because Sydney does not give a shit and she literally starts stoning her and laughing maniacally. Addie then has to throw a rock at Sydney's head to knock her out like she's a Looney Tunes character, and then she tries to grab Phoebe. "I will not let you suffer," I whisper in her ear, desperately and rushed. A hot tear breaks free, burning a path down my cheek. "You saved me, Phoebe. You are so fucking strong and brave, and you will always be my hero. Do you hear me?" I hear you," she chokes, sobs racking her chest. Inhaling deeply, I lunge for a branch in the pit, barely feeling the flames licking at my flesh. I'm jabbing the sharp tip of the branch deep into her jugular. Phoebe convulses beneath me, blood pouring from her neck and rivulets. I hold on to her tightly, but I cannot say the same for my shattering soul. A sob bursts from my throat, and I press my forehead against hers, hardly feeling the blood soaking my skin. Tears of sorrow and rage track down my cheeks, and all I can do is just squeeze her harder, rocking us back and forth as she dies in my arms. "Sleep, Phoebe," I whisper against her, my voice cracking. "Go to sleep now."
Just close your eyes, sun is going down, you'll be alright, no one can hurt you now. Come morning light, you and I'll be safe and sound.
R.I.P. Phoebe, but unfortunately I know this video is already going to be too long, so we gotta keep it moving. 2 months later, it is established that one of the men, Xavier, has bought Addie and owns her now, and he's extremely violent and non-consensual with her. Like, it's actually very sad and triggering. Like, I know we're only laughing at the ridiculous parts of the story, but I will say, if you were interested in picking up this series, just be careful because there's massive trigger warnings. I will not talk about those things in this video because not only do I find it unnecessary, but we're also just here to have a good time. So let's focus on the goofy stuff. So at this point, Addie is planning her escape. However, Sydney threatens to expose her plan to escape, and so they get into a fight, and Addie ends up killing her by stabbing a pen into her neck. So Sydney dies, and then Addie's reeling from the adrenaline when Rio walks in, and he's like, "Fuck, Princesa, what did you do?" And he tries to like calm her down by like grabbing her face, and he's like, "Look at me, mama, what the fuck are you gonna do now?" I'm only including a screenshot so that you can see that mama is italicized and has an accent mark, so you know he sounded extra Puerto Rican there. Rio lets her escape and cuts the tracker out of her. In return, she offers to help his sister, and by that I mean just tell Zayd to help his sister. They say goodbye and leave, or in Rio's case, he says, "Bye, Princesa." And Addie now has newfound determination to survive and thinks about Zayd. "They see me as a diamond because I have Zayd's love, but they fail to remember that's what forged me into a stone so unbreakable. He's taught me a lot about myself and who I really am, but most importantly, he's taught me how to persevere." He taught you how to persevere? So do you just have like no inner strength at all? Again, I feel like since this is the only time throughout the series that Addie is like actually away from Zayd for so long and has to survive being trafficked, this would have been an opportunity to show more of her character persevering on her own without having to tie any kind of like bravery or overcoming hardship to a man. Because how the hell did he teach you how to persevere? When he put a gun up your coochie? It's not that hard to kind of build up your main female character in a way that isn't always about a man. Anyway, during this time, Zayd is buying girls at the auctions, hoping to get more information about Addie. Funny how he's supposed to be a criminal mastermind, but he can't seem to track her down or find like the courage to the cowardly doghouse. You know, considering he was able to outsmart the bad guys earlier with, you know, tapping into the Bluetooth speaker because they didn't fucking check their ears. Somehow the other bad guys that have Addie snatched up just have some invisibility force field going on that it's so impossible to track down, even for Zayd himself. And so now he's just like, damn, I guess I'll just buy a bunch of trafficked women until I find Addie. It does work though, because when Addie escapes, Zayd's team finds her in the woods, and that is when they finally reunite halfway through the story. She tells Zayd about Rio's sister's name so that he can rescue her later on, which is also great news. I don't quite understand how he's able to like locate a random girl that he's never met just by name alone, but he couldn't find Adeline all this time when he was so good at stalking her in book 1, but whatever. So the rest of the book is about Addie trying to recover after all that trauma. Her recovery process involves getting cooped up in the house, not talking much, not wanting to go out. She will flip out if people approach her. Like, she's very prone to anger, which is very understandable. She will like start screaming and scratching from nightmares when she's trying to fall asleep. And then during the day, she just acts like a ghost. So she's totally traumatized. It's also mentioned that she sees a therapist at the same time too, which is great, but we never actually see like any scene where she's talking to a therapist. And as I talk about some of the other stuff that happens in the book, it makes me wonder how much is she actually sharing with this therapist, because some of the things that happen, I don't know if a therapist would condone, but we'll get to that part. But anyway, one of the things that they have to learn to overcome is the fact that she tenses up whenever Zayd even approaches her, which is the exact same reaction that I would have too, but hey, better late than never for Miss Addie here. So Zayd has been having to grapple being respectful of her boundaries, which is obviously a brand new concept for him. I'm all for pushing Addie's boundaries, but this isn't one I'm willing to. Despite my less than honorable methods with her in the past, the last thing I want to do is worsen her trauma. She's been through enough. She doesn't need another self-serving man taking something from her that she's not willing to give. When she's ready to accept me again, I can't promise I won't push her past her comfort zone and work to reawaken a part of her I'm sure she feels is lost. But that takes time and trust, and I'm a very patient man. It's kind of weird that all of a sudden you're fine with respecting her consent when you didn't at all in book 1. But sure, I'm glad that you can keep it in your pants now. He does keep cameras in the bathroom though, and he claims that he's not going to watch her only if she gives him a reason to. So basically, she's on suicide watch while he's like constantly monitoring her and making sure she's okay. I get it, considering the circumstances, but personally, the last person that I want surveilling me while I'm taking a shit is Zayd. Another thing I find conflicting is this conversation later on, where Zayd says, "Don't underestimate me, Addie. I'll become a poor man for you." And she says, "I don't even know your last name or your birthday." He says, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize those things were so important." She says, "Aren't we having a heart-to-heart? Plus, you keep threatening me with marriage. Shouldn't I know your last name?" And he says, "Does this mean you're actually going to take my threats seriously and marry me?" And then she says, "It's a simple question, the kind of question anyone would ask on the first date, or even before the first date, just in case the man ends up being an obsessive stalker who murders people." Girl, this is not the kind of quirky banter that you think it is. Zayd does end up telling her that his birthday is September 7th. So for all the astrology girlies out there who are watching this video, you're gonna have to let us know in the comments if Zayd being a Virgo checks out, because I gotta know, are other Virgo men like this? Let me know so that I can avoid them. Later on, Zayd takes her down this long dirt driveway that leads to this mini village where there's a massive long building in the center with several smaller ones surrounding it. There's a greenhouse, which is where a lot of the activity that she sees going on for the day is happening. Like, people are milling about, carrying baskets of fruits and vegetables. There's girls like walking and giggling together. And it turns out to be this place where survivors go if they don't have a safe home to return to, because Zayd actually owns hundreds of acres, so he can just just build out these dorms for the abused and the homeless. And this isn't the only safe house that he has either, because they are all around the country, and he plans on even expanding it to other countries too. This guy is Mother Teresa up in this bitch. He literally invented free housing. It's amazing how he had all this time and resources to do all of this stuff, and we had no idea throughout the first book while he was spending all of it stalking Addie. It's like, where does he have the time to do that, you know? But you just really gotta admire the work-life balance of the world's first ethical billionaire. So seeing all of this moves Addie so deeply that she decides she doesn't want to be a victim anymore. Instead, she wants to channel all of this into philanthropy. So she says that she wants to help out, and that includes going out on the missions with him. And he says that she can join, but that means that she'll need to start training again for how to defend herself and fight and use a weapon. But as they start their training sessions, she finds training to be very difficult because that means that Zayd has to touch her, and every time he does, she panics and waffles between like freezing up or just going ballistic. Girl, like, I get the noble philanthropy that you're trying to do, but perhaps maybe you shouldn't try to murder a bunch of dangerous traffickers if you're so triggered by them right now. Maybe this is a time that we should focus on healing instead, question mark. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what your therapist would say too. There is a mission to take down the evil society, and so for this purpose, they recruit Sibby, who was a side character that appeared briefly in the first book. If you don't remember, she was the girl that was dressed up like Chucky's bride when they went to the haunted amusement park, and she was like killing a bunch of people before she got arrested. So in this book, it's established that she was locked up in a psych ward awaiting trial, but then she escaped. So Zayd is giving her a place to stay, which means that Sibby can help Addie with the training. Later on, they go on this heist, which involves a car chase, and I don't know if it's just like the adrenaline or maybe like the car is just like constantly bouncing or whatever, but this is a time when Addie is finally horny. So while they're in the car, she is just getting in the mood, and she's willing to spice things up just a little bit for her healing, of course. This is when we get like an almost sex scene, but don't worry, it is still equally as cringy. Basically, she puts a cigarette in her mouth, and then she says very sensually, "Am I tangible, or will you let me slip through your fingers like the smoke from the cigarette?" She then takes turns putting the cigarette in her mouth, and then his, and then back to hers, and then she says, "Our mouths are touching the same spot. Does that count as kissing?" To which Zayd replies, "You tell me, little mouse. When I make you cry out for God, does that count as praying?" Cringe! Anyway, they end up making out, and that's it, because she only wanted to be intimate with him for as long as the cigarette was lit. So that was their little baby step there. 1 month passes. By this point, Addie has been sparring with Sibby and Zayd every day, all day, and in her words, she thinks, "I can't lie and say that I'm not slowly becoming a badass." Good for you, girl. We love it when a girl boss miraculously overcomes her trauma after 1 month of training. Like, that is a very realistic timeline. The weight I lost during my captivity has been packed back on with muscle. Not only am I back to a healthy weight, but I'm in better shape than ever, toned in all the right places, muscle lining my arms and legs, and even my ass has rounded. Well, at least we covered the most important part of your recovery, which is having a thick booty. So part of her recovery is also learning how to enjoy intimacy and sex again. And one of the ways that Zayd helps her do it is by telling her that instead of allowing a knife to cause her pain like it did before, she should use it to give herself pleasure instead. So with his help and guidance, she literally puts a knife up her coochie. Fortunately, it was the side of the handle, but still. Again, I have to ask, would your therapist approve of these practices? Because I really don't know. Then later on, we follow Addie going on her first real mission to capture the madame that had been a total bitch to like all the girls and basically like was a huge part of the trafficking business. They're able to capture her, and then next they go find Xavier when he goes to a nightclub. But when they are there, Addie gets super triggered, and she is also struggling with like the idea of being an executioner, because even though Zayd was gonna hurt Xavier, she has to yell at him to like not kill him. I don't know why, because Xavier literally did unimaginable crimes to you that I had to read about. And also, you shanked Sydney with a pen in like the first half of the book. So you like literally killed Sydney, but you seem to be fine with that part now. Like, we kind of forgot about that already, but whatever. In their struggles in the nightclub though, and all the commotion, security comes over, so Zayd just knocks Xavier out and kidnaps him. So now they go home, where Zayd puts Xavier in the basement. Addie is still very rattled up from anxiety and she's like pacing around. Zayd is trying to talk to her, but she doesn't want to hear him out because again, she's very triggered at this point. Like she literally saw the dude that has been doing these horrible things to her for a very long time. She tries to leave to another room. Zayd is still chasing after her. Instead of giving her space, she says, "Stop it, just leave me be, Zayd." He replies, "How many times will you run away before you learn that you can't escape me?" He growls, getting in my personal space before I can even take a breath. I take a step back, retreating from his intensity. He doesn't let me go though, stepping back into me until I'm pressed against the wall. What happened to respecting her distance? I feel like it's one thing to lecture someone about running away from their problems, but it's another thing when your girlfriend is clearly triggered by seeing the man that literally bought her and used her body for several months and tortured her, and like maybe giving her a second to take a breath and collect herself. He clutches the back of my neck and pulls me in. "See, that's what we're not going to do, Adeline," he barks, baring his teeth. "We're not going to act like you're so tough that you don't need me anymore. Because you want to know something, baby? There are very few men in this world capable of killing me, and I fucking need you. Do you understand me? Do you think needing me somehow makes you weak? Doesn't it?" I snap. "No, baby, it makes you strong. I may own every breath in your body, but make no mistake, Adeline, you own mine too. I am yours to command, to bend and break, to mold and manipulate. Do you think that makes me weak? Or do you think I'm strong enough to admit that even though my body can physically live on without you, I would never get my fucking soul back? Without you, I will shatter. But with you, I am indestructible." First of all, I don't think Addie needing you means that she's strong. It means that she's mentally ill. Secondly, I find it very ironic that him handling her panic attack means centering himself with how he needs her, or else he will lose his soul and shatter. Like, these are very intense feelings to put upon someone having a panic attack. Like, why can't she just get an adult coloring book or do a therapy worksheet or something to calm down first before we swear our souls to each other, you know? It's a bit much. So lo and behold, his reaction and intensity does not help quell her triggered emotions because she tells him to stop touching her. She then takes a gun from his waistband and points it at his head. "You're no different, right? You forced yourself on me before, remember? Taken from me, stolen from me. What makes you so different, huh?" He replies, "Do these memories keep you up at night? Do they torment you? Do you think about my touch as anything other than a fucking godsend? What you've forgotten is that the heart beating inside your chest isn't fucking yours. It's mine. And if my heart has stopped working, then pull that trigger, little mouse. Kill the rest of me. I'm nothing if I'm not the reason you breathe." Girl, you better shoot him right now because I cannot deal with his dramatic ass. If not for yourself, do it for us. Unfortunately, she doesn't shoot him and, you know, she ends up having a breakdown. He holds her in his arms. She's sobbing and he's trying to reassure her that those bad guys can't take away what makes her special, which, I mean, I don't know what that is. I guess being horny. She says she doesn't know how to be okay with intimacy anymore. He says, "You took back the power with that knife. Now you can take it back when it comes to physical touch. Let me show you." He then grabs a rose from his nightstand. Not the rose that I showed in my sponsor, but like an actual flower rose with the thorns still there. So there's like blood dripping from his fingers as he's gripping this. And then he says, "I've been protecting you from getting hurt, but sometimes embracing the pain is the only way to overcome it. Take off your dress." She follows his orders to take her clothes off, and basically she's guided by him to like lean her back into him, and he gives her the rose to hold on to like it's a fucking stress ball while he is touching her body. During this time, he's telling her to relax and asking her questions like, "What makes you feel powerful, Addie? Was it holding the gun in your hand? What did holding the gun to my head make you feel? Oh, it made you feel powerful? What does power mean to you? What does power feel like?" My question is, what the fuck kind of weird therapy session is this? When she tells him that power makes her feel good, he says, "Good. I want you to think about that feeling. In your mind, hold that gun to whoever you wish. To me, to any of the men that hurt you, whatever makes you feel good." And I'm like, what is this? An ad for Headspace? Like, why are you leading a meditation session now? And it's a kinky session too, because he puts his hand on her throat and wraps his other hand around her hand that's holding the rose. And then he squeezes that hand so that the thorns pierce her skin, and he guides their hands down until the petals brush against her coochie. So now we're having this weird sensual massage session. Zayd is just really all kinds of doctors and practitioners right now. So he guides her fingers across the petals like they're reading fucking Braille or something. And then he's like, do you feel how soft and wet these petals are? This is what I feel every time I'm inside you. And then he pushes 2 of her fingers into the center of the rose as if it were her coochie. And basically they're fingering a rose. And let me tell you, this was not part of the instruction manual I got when I was sponsored by Lovehoney. But I guess it works because she's really getting into it. And then he gets to touch her metaphorical rose. And then she finally has an orgasm. Yay, we're healed! We did it, everyone. Afterwards, she feels more open to touch him now. And so while she's giving him a BJ, she has this revelation. I realized I never needed to be afraid of his touch. It was men that defiled me, and Zayd was never a man. So while she's doing the sucky sucky, he says to her, you look like such a pretty whore for me. And then some part of her gets kind of pissed off by that because, you know, this is very similar language to what the trafficker said to her. But it's okay because he saves it by saying, you were never a whore for those men, little mouse. You know why? Because they never owned any part of you. They took what they did not possess. That doesn't make you a whore. That makes you a survivor. A devilish grin quirks his lips up. But you are my whore. You're my everything. And you become so much more with each passing day. I possess every fucking part of you, Adeline. Even when you screamed and cried that you didn't want me, you could never let me go. All those nights you stood at your window letting me watch you, confronting me instead of running and instigating me knowing what would happen. And when you did run, you only ever used your mouth to try to get away. You gravitated towards me just as I did you, and that is something no other man will ever have. Wow, such inspirational words. Truly, it's like, you're not a whore, you're a survivor. But if you were a whore, you would be my whore. Because I stalked you and acted obsessively over you first. Doesn't that make you feel so much better after being trafficked? And I guess it does because they do have sex. Afterward, he cleans her up, and that's when she realizes that he had carved a rose into his chest directly over his heart as a symbol of his love to her. And his explanation is that what had happened to Addie when she got snatched up and trafficked was his own personal failure. And the branding on his chest serves as a reminder for that every day. And so then she's like deeply touched by this, and she's like, no, this wasn't your fault, Zayd. You rescued me, and I will never forget that. And the only way I can repay you is by saving myself, getting stronger, and not letting what those 6 fucks did to me control my life. I may have cracks, but they did not shatter me. My rose still has fucking thorns, Zayd. Do you understand me? And then she literally licks the blood off his chest. And you know that shit turns him on because these bitches be freaky. I wanted to know what it tasted like when someone else bleeds for me, I whisper. He works his jaw. I'll always bleed for you. He connects his lips softly with mine, licking his blood from my lips. You're still my helpless little mouse, but only when it comes to my irresistible prowess, he says. You're such a prick. No, baby. I'm just a masochist that can't get enough of your beauty, even when you draw blood. I purse my lips. I guess I'm the prick then. Honestly, with the dramatic ass way that they talk to each other, it really goes to show that they're good for each other, right? Because how are you gonna find someone else that talks to you this way? It just goes to show there's always a freaky bitch out there for everyone. You gotta find someone who is willing to be as cringy as you are. But now the question is, what are they gonna do with Xavier? Because he's still down in the basement. Well, they end up torturing him upon the capture with the same methods that they had inflicted in the culling, which is basically shooting arrows at him. But you know what's even more sickening than that? It's the fact that Zayd ends up fingering Addie right in front of Xavier. So she's like moaning and groaning all over the place while he's literally like fingering her coochie right in front of this guy. Now that is torture. He then makes her come while holding an arrow to Xavier's throat. And then they kill both Xavier and the madame from earlier in the book. But just when you think it couldn't get even more ridiculous, this happens. Sibby did what she always does and took shit a step too far. She decided it would be fun to play fucking frisbee with body parts or some shit. So we spent an hour alone trying to locate every piece of Francesca so we could bury them. By the time I picked up all 10 of her fingers, I didn't fucking care anymore. Didn't help that Sibby decided to have an imaginary orgy directly after, forcing Addie and I to leave until she finished. Literally. You know what? Sure. Why the fuck not? Let's just have this bitch throw around body parts like it's a frisbee game. And then let's just have her have an imaginary orgy. Like, fuck it. Let's just write whatever we fucking want now. It doesn't matter. The story doesn't have to fucking matter. We can just write shit that doesn't make any sense. Let's just push the boundaries of what literature is. Or rather, cliterature. Could Jane Austen come up with this? I don't think so. So later on, when Addie is feeling self-conscious about her body because of all the scars that she got from when she was trafficked, Zayd punches the mirror, grabs a shard, and then cuts her old scars to make new ones. And he says that these scars will become his too, and that he will claim them as his own, so that the only thing that she will see when she looks at those scars is him. What a sweet gesture. However, maybe her healing should involve owning her own body instead of being constantly reminded that she belongs to someone else, considering the source of her trauma was the fact that she was literally owned by a man. I don't know. Just a thought. Anyway, so they have sex, except this time she is on top, which is a way to show that she is in control now. Truly taking girl boss pussy queen to another level, literally. Adeline, if you don't sit back down right fucking now, she slaps her hand over my mouth, and she might as well have stuck a lightning rod up my ass. I'm so goddamn shocked. Imagine being so not used to having a woman be on top of you that it literally feels like Zeus just did anal with you. Like, damn, you've been putting Guns and Roses up her coochie, but you haven't tried this position? I thought Zayd would have a little bit more creativity than that, come on. All right, so this was fun, but now it's time to get back to business with our vigilante hacker philanthropy. Later on, Zayd appears on TV as anonymous with like the distorted voice and the mask or like shadows that like cover who he is. On TV, he makes this announcement that like before, when the news stations were reporting Xavier as missing, he reveals that Xavier was someone who was trafficking women and confirmed that he was dead. He takes the blame for it so that Addie is safe and that she's not responsible for being the reason why Xavier is dead. Because the way that she killed him was like stabbing him in the neck. I think this is like a very common method that she does. But anyway, so later on, they gotta celebrate, right? Because they just killed another dude. Yay! He lets Addie handcuff him and they have sex. Fun fact, he has an octopus tattoo on his back. I don't remember if there was any reason for that, but I guess if you ever attend a Haunting Adeline trivia night, you'll have that little fun fact in your back pocket. Speaking of back pockets, while they're doing it, Addie is thinking about how since he carved a rose over his heart for her, she wants him to do the same to her so that they can have matching roses. Aw, so cute when couples do that. He literally uses a knife to carve a rose on her chest while she's touching herself. This is a new kink that's unlocked between them for sure. But you know what? Good for them. They get more turned on and they have sex. They even say crazy stuff like, do you think I'll ever stop now? I want to drink your fucking tears like they're the blood of Christ. And then she chokes out, am I your salvation too? And he says, you are always going to be the one that saved me, little mouse. It is truly crazy the kind of things that you will say when you are horny. Now, just when you're thinking to yourself, when the hell is this story gonna be over? A new development occurs. The bad guys have now kidnapped Addie's parents. It's okay though, because later they get the parents back. Somehow, amidst the stress of having her parents snatched up, they're still able to have sex outside against a tree. And then a very concerning conversation occurs. Zayd looks at her stomach and says, would this being swollen with my child make you stay? And then she's like, maybe one day? Question mark. He replies, I wasn't asking permission, baby. Would you stay or would you run off with my child? She's so disoriented with him bringing this shit up all of a sudden, and she's like, I have the IUD. To which he replies, do you? You didn't, I snap. You sleep so heavily sometimes, he responds, pressing deeper into me as I try to shove him back. Zayd, I warn, voice shaking. Will it make you stay? He questions again. You're not asking if a baby will make me stay. You're asking if I'd stay if you forced a pregnancy on me, I bite out. Also during this conversation, not only is he banging her against a tree, they also tied a belt strap so she's like getting choked out at the same time. And he says, am I still worth loving, little mouse? I know there will be arguments in the comments about whether the story really is that kind of kink like fairly represented, but I'm just saying in the narrative canon, like in the context of this story, or like in the context of what the author is trying to do, the characters do actually consent and want each other mutually. However, based on what I'm reading, she clearly does not want to have a baby and he intends to trap her in a relationship with one, which is a very common abuse tactic in real life. And that's why that shit is weird, because she's not even getting turned on by that. How are they going to feel when you're 9 months pregnant and I'm chasing after you. I tighten my lips, but then smile with victory when I realize I'm not even ovulating. When I tell him so, he only smirks. I didn't take out your IUD, he says. My mouth drops open. Then what the fuck was all that? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm fucking relieved, but what the shit, Say? I needed to be sure you're 100% in this with me. A baby is the only thing that could permanently tie your life to mine. Legally, at least. Ethically, well, I will always be in your life, whether you know I am or not. Shaking my head, I tug my jeans up my body. Yeah, whatever, I mumble. You're a dick. He laughs again, accepting that statement without even a hint of shame. I grab his hand, turning him back to me. No more lies, I say, from either of us. Baby, I never lied. I never actually said that I took out your IUD. You still made me believe that you did, I argue. When I do get you pregnant, you will know about it, he promises, though it sounds like another threat. You will watch me pull the IUD from your body myself. That, oddly makes me feel better, and I need therapy. I sigh. You're always going to be a creep, aren't you? And my being a creep is always going to make your pussy wet.
Funny. Yes, but not funny, haha. Funny weird.
Let's move on to this hacker vigilante business. There is one more bad guy that they need to take down, and her name is Claire, who I mentioned earlier. She's the one that's operating the secret society, like she's the puppet master. When they confront Claire, she ends up revealing a bigger, more nefarious plan with her supervillain monologue. I will help you eliminate trafficking. While the skin trade is vastly profitable, there is something more that I desire. Absolute control over the human population, of course. Right now, people are too self-aware of their useless existence. I want full power, us both to have full power. Zaid replies, to do what with? What exactly do you intend to do with this power? Create a whole new era, of course. We can do anything we want. We could make their lives useful, give them a real purpose. And what would that purpose be? I cut in. To be mindless robots that would serve you? Suffering would end, she snaps, and this planet would thrive. If humans had real law and order, we could do so many things. End world hunger, close the gap between the poor and the rich, and lessen poverty and homelessness. I shake my head. You're trying to make taking away people's free will sound virtuous. You're exchanging one form of slavery for another. I'm exchanging human suffering for a new, better world, she argues. The technology you could create would advance us into an entirely new era. No one would ever suffer through what you have ever again. No more children sacrificed, no more women sold. I would dismantle it all. Zaid replies, you want me to create some type of technology to implant in people's brains and make them actual robots? Make it to where they have no fight? She raises her brows, a smile forming. Now there's an idea. I can create a new world with laws and consequences for breaking them. Your technology could advance us and make it easier to enforce these laws. We could force people to walk in a straight line wherever we drive, but taking away their ability to think for themselves? My God, that would be wonderful. Her eyes alight with excitement. Could you do that? I can only gape at her, utterly speechless. Does ending human trafficking sound like a dream? Absolutely, but in exchange for some fantastical idea to rip away people's free will and turn them into zombies. Technology can do anything. Its only limitation is its creator, Zaid says. She grins, and I see something twinkle in her eye that she's stolen from me, hope. But it doesn't belong to her. It belongs to the souls she's responsible for breaking. You see? We can do anything, she breathes. I believe you have no limitations. Unlimited. Together we're unlimited. Together we'll be the greatest team there'd ever be. Zay, turning people to zombies using vague technology. With you and I defying logic, they'll never bring us down. In a way, the climax of Hunting Adeline is defying gravity from Wicked. Both of them go on for way too long, and both the writers don't know how to trim down the story, so they had to split it into 2 parts. Anyway, so they finally kill Claire because her plan, not only was it like cartoonishly evil, it just didn't make sense because it literally relied on this vague idea of technology controlling people. But how? Girl, you don't even have any blueprints, an outline of how this would work logistically, anything? I fear she was not a competent enough girl boss for that. But anyway, they kill Claire, Addie stabs her in the throat with a knife. The story finally concludes because we finally killed the big bad guy. We get the epilogue where, of course, they have sex, and then afterward, Zaid pulls a rose from the nightstand and gives it to her. And when she holds the rose, a ring falls from the petals and falls onto the bed, and she's like, Are you proposing because you're in love with me or because I gave you anal? You know what? Don't answer that. You'll make me change my mind if you say it's because you're in love with me. I want to be rewarded for the anal. You're fine with carving an ugly ass rose in your chest, but anal is the biggest accomplishment in the bedroom of being a freaky bitch? So the book ends with them happily ever after, and the final page is actually a note left behind by Rio. I don't know what you did to convince him, and I don't really want to know. Thank you for saving Katerina and keeping her safe, but fuck you for sparing my life, especially because I think you did it to fucking spite me, and I can't even blame you for that. Stay safe, Princesa. The end. This is the last book in the Haunting Adeline series, but I do think there will probably be spin-offs of the other characters. But I found it already hard to give a shit about anything that was going on, so I don't think whatever future spin-off that's happening, I will be reading. Now that we are at this point, I am curious to know whatever guesses you had about what they would do with roses, was it accurate, and was it more wild than what actually happened, or did that genuinely surprise you? And speaking of roses, don't forget I still have that deal in my description box if you would like to get the Lovehoney rose or any of the other products that they have on their site. You can use the discount code CindyLove10 and that will give you an additional 10% discount. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video. I definitely have ideas for other types of roasts to make in the future. We will cross that bridge when we get there. Until then, goodbye.
Just close your eyes.